You're listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. Every week I talk to resilient people and collect their stories so we can learn from the challenging times that they've had, the tools they've utilized, and the lessons they've learned and how they're helping other people. So this week we're talking to Samira, and Samira is a leader in the utility industry and a diversity and inclusion champion and mental health advocate. She has used her passion for people and their well-being to establish groups within her organization that drive deeper cultural understanding and open dialogue. Samira also co-hosts a podcast called We're Not So Different, where she and her co-host counter cultural ignorance through engagement and candid repertoire. You can connect with Samira via social media at WNS Different, Different, and through her email address. And I'll post both of those things in the show notes. So let's get started. Samira, it sounds like you've been through a lot in your life. Now you're working to help others through your podcast. Can you tell me a little bit more about the things in life that have made you resilient?
That's a great question. The things in life that have made me resilient. There were a lot of instances, episodes, traumas that happened, but the resilience part, I think that really alludes to what makes me want to continue moving forward. What makes me want to get up and do more. And I think for me has always been a belief that I can fix it and things can get better and things must get better. And I really don't know where that initial drive came from, whether it's my spirituality, trusting in God, or my belief in humanity. So the more I'm thinking about it, I really think that it's just survival instincts. I think we're all wired to want to survive. How we do that is, I'm going to say it's dependent on your surroundings and on your personality. I'm a survivor, and I think it really has to do because my family is Iranian. I grew up at the beginning of the revolution. So I was born in 1980. And so I grew up in a household of survivors, of people who escaped a country, escaped war, escaped oppression, and, grew up going to protests of, anti-Islamic regime type protests and anti-war protests. So I think for me, that environment, in addition to my intrinsic human need to survive, has really helped nurture this resilience and soldier type of mentality where I have to go through the tough times and I have to survive and I have to get through it. So I think that's really where my resilience started, was the combination of my human need to survive and protect myself and my surroundings and environment.
That's wonderful. It sounds like you and your family you're born from survivors, it sounds like. And have you heard of that word epigenetics? So it's in your DNA to survive, and you handle crisis and struggles maybe in similar ways that your ancestors may have. So that's something you may want to look into at some point too, because that's what I'm thinking of when I think of your struggles and your family struggles to, get away from war and the revolution and, and protesting to really help others in the similar situation. You mentioned some of the challenges you've had with the loss of a child. Can you tell me a little bit more about that situation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I got married very young and I had two sons very young. I was 21 when my oldest was born. I was 25 when my youngest was born. And I had experienced a lot of trauma during my marriage and even before that, outside of my marriage, just with my parents' divorce and deaths and with friends and family and just a lot of crazy incidents that just kept happening. My husband and I were separating. We were living in Texas, and I remember I had left and he came home and I was just gone because I couldn't do it anymore. And during that time, I found out that I was pregnant. I was on birth control pills, and so it was a really big shock to me and to him that I was pregnant when I had separated. So I had come back to California, but then went back move back to Texas, but move to a different city so that I could work and get on my feet with the two kids. And so he would be relatively near to help and whatnot. And during that time, we didn't really try to work it out, but it was still a very difficult pregnancy. I had, both of my boys. I was living with my cousin. I was working at a pharmacy. So I was on my feet all day, and my youngest was not even a year old. So it was a very, 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 very difficult time in general. And my ex-husband and his family and community were also, so during my pregnancy, I didn't really have a lot of support outside of my cousin, who she was a single mom as well, working full time. And so she did her best and her son did his best to help me. And some local friends and family that could give a little bit, they really, really did try their best to help me. And I'm eternally grateful for the support that they gave. I was about 31 weeks pregnant, and I had gone to the doctor, and they saw that there was something interesting about her umbilical cord. There's supposed to be like 3 vessels, and she only had 2. So they were like, let's give you 2 weeks, and then we're going to induce labor because we're just concerned about her growth and development. She was a girl. And then I just remember a few days later going in for a routine, just check, they wanted to check her heartbeat and whatnot. And I just remember sitting there, and they're trying to put the monitors around my belly. And I just saw the nurse's face, like she just went white. She couldn't find it. I could see her kind of panic, and there was another woman in the room, and my heart sank. My heart sank, and I just sat silent, and my husband was, he was there with me, and he just sat with me, and he's like, "What's going on?" And I was like, I just couldn't say anything. Yeah. I knew, like in my heart, I knew, like I felt weird. It felt different. Like I knew. And then I remember we went into the other room, and another nurse came in, and she brought the ultrasound machine, and they were searching and searching and searching. And then I saw her face, and she was like, "I need to go get the doctor." Yeah. And then the doctor came in, and she looked and looked and looked and tried to move my belly around and cause movement or something. And she just looked at me, and she's like, "I'm so sorry, but she doesn't have a heartbeat." In that moment, my heart, my world just like collapsed. Yeah. Like everything just, like as if life wasn't hard enough, being a single mom with 2 kids, working, a barely living wage type job, and estranged from my husband, far away from my family and friends and my community, because I was born and raised in California but was living in Texas. And I was done. How heart-wrenching. And it was horrifying. Yeah. It is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. Like having that experience, and even there was guilt, right? Like I don't want to sit and act like there was a lot of guilt for me, because there were always thoughts like I shouldn't be pregnant. Yeah. We were on the pill, like I'm divorcing, like this, how am I going to handle 3 kids? Like, how am I going to do this? So there was a lot of guilt for me as well, because I kind of felt like I brought it on to myself. I blamed myself a lot. I blamed my ex-husband. I blamed his community and his family for a lot of the lack of support and just double standards and a lot of drama that was going on there. And there was a lot of blame and a lot of anger and a lot of hurt and disappointment. And it was really, really, really sad. And so I ended up having to go to the hospital and delivering her. Oh, so yeah. She was the only child I got an epidural with, because I was like, I just can't, the pain. I was like, I can't do the pain of, I couldn't do it. And then that was another traumatic experience. You have this child, and then they want to take her from you and put her in the morgue, and then they won't release her to us until we pay, like it was $800 or $1,200, which we didn't have. So we were like, well, what happens if we can't get the money? And they're like, well, we keep her until you can. And we were like, absolutely not. I was like, there's no way. I just looked at the nurse, and I'm like, yeah, I was like, there's just no emotion, just dead in her face. Oh, you're not taking my child into the morgue. Like, you're not doing it. And she was like, okay. And she looked at me, and she looked at my husband, and she looked back at me, and she said, well, I'm going on my lunch break in an hour. There won't be a nurse checking in on you for 2 hours. And I looked at her, and I was like, what? And my husband was like, what is she talking about? Okay, so we'll be fine. And then she said, no, she's like, no one will check on you for 2 hours. And I looked at her and I said, got it. I said, thank you. And then I looked at my husband. I said, you need to go get a blanket or something. I was like, and you need to take her. And so we did, and we took her, and that was a whole other traumatic experience because my husband, my father-in-law had a large property. So they put a space where they could, dig a grave for her and bury her so that we could have like somewhere to have her there.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole experience, just like, I having to let her go when I wasn't ready and losing her, and then the guilt around it, and then having to tell my son was 4.5, no, yeah, almost 5 years old. So he had seen me go through the pregnancy of his younger brother, and he was so excited to have a sister. So for him, it was like just telling him that was heart-wrenching. And how do you have this conversation with people? And my mom flew out to be with me, and it was just, I fell into a very deep depression after that. I just didn't want to get up, get out of bed. I don't want to say it was thoughts of suicide, but it was more thoughts of, I just don't want to exist for a while.
Yeah.
And I think that if I didn't have my sons, and if my family hadn't already experienced the traumatic effects of suicide, because I had a cousin who committed suicide when I was very young, and I saw how it impacted my entire family and still does, I think I might have. But I think my love for my sons, the fact that I really felt like I was their main provider, like I was their only hope for a decent life, I think that really just made me, hang on for dear life. And, my faith would, just kind of give me just enough to continue to going to work, to continue, putting on a happy face and finishing school. And those were the things. But, the state I was in, even though I was doing those things, was complete misery, just, empty and just miserable and closed off and alone. The incident that really, really, really woke me up and shook me, I'll never forget it. I was on my way home. No, I was on my way to work.
Yeah.
And my husband was driving me. And I just remember staring out the window, and, it gets gloomy in Texas quite a bit because of the, rain and whatnot. And it was just a gloomy, humid day. And I was just miserable, and he was driving, and I'm just looking out the window. And in my head, I'm thinking, I wonder how many muscle relaxers I need to take in order to just go to sleep and not wake up for a while. Just go to sleep. And maybe when I wake up, everything will be better. Like, people will start to care, and things will change, and, my husband will change, and everything will change. Lies we tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then immediately I beat myself up in that same thought where I was like, wow, you're such a crappy pharmacy tech. You don't even know how many like Flexerals you have to take to pass out.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness.
That tells you the state of the human mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when I got home that night, I received a phone call from my cousin, and she was like, Elizabeth's dead. And I was like, wait, what? Elizabeth was her neighbor who was also my running partner. We used to run together. And she was also a single mom going through a divorce with 2 girls, almost the same age as my kids. And I was like, what do you mean she's dead? What happened? And she said, they found her in the closet and she had committed suicide.
Oh my goodness.
And I just like everything, every cell in my being shook, and I was terrified. I was so scared that I had my husband, who was at that time, sleeping in another room. And I was like, you need to just stay here with me. And when I would take a shower, I would make him sit in the bedroom, and I would leave the door open, and he just had to be close to me for some reason. Like, I could not be alone. And and not that I was going to do anything, but there was this immense fear and realization that could have been me. Like, I could have done that. Like, oh my God. And then I just remembering, hearing the details, and they said she had shot herself in the heart, and I was like, why would she do that? And we were all like, why would she do that? She could have just suffered before she died. She might not have died right away, blah, blah, blah. And then I just kept thinking and thinking, and I was talking to my uncle, and he was telling me about my cousin, because he was one of the people who had to go and, identify the body. And they were like, he had hit himself, shot himself in the heart as well. And we were just talking, and I was like asking myself, like, why would you do that? Why would you shoot yourself in the heart? Because that might prolong a death. And then it clicked for me. And I'm like, because that's where the pain is. That's where the tightness is. That's where all the heaviness is, where you feel like you're going to suffocate. It's right there in your chest. And I was like, I totally get it. You want to you want to shoot it out. You just want it gone. And that's where it's concentrated. And that's the only way I could kind of rationalize that choice. And I just dwelled on that forever. Just after like a day, I just all of a sudden just kind of snapped and was like, I need to be happy. And I need to do whatever it takes to be happy. And from that moment, I just stopped giving in to my anger. And just let it go. Like if I was angry at my husband, I'm like, I'm done being angry with you. I'm done being angry with your family. I'm done being angry at my family. I'm done with anger. I'm done with resentment. I'm done. I was like, I'm done. I won't want to go. I want to move on, and I want to be happy. I want to be happy with my kids. I want my kids to have a good life, all of these things. And it just was like, I just became this person that was constantly on the track to find happiness and to be happy. What does that mean? What does that even look like? What does that mean for me? How could I create that for my life? Like I hadn't been happy in so long that I didn't even remember what that meant anymore.
Yeah.
And so that was like the biggest incident for me. It was, accumulated trauma and fighting and anger and resentment from many, many different situations. And then the breaking point, being losing my daughter, and then my friend committing suicide, and all of that shock just kind of exploded. And it was just like, I just realized I needed to be done, or that was going to be my destiny. That was going to be my fate. My children would be done. Like it just was like, I couldn't let that happen. I was like, that can't happen.
So you made that decision at that time that you needed to be happy, get happy no matter what.
No matter what. Try whatever you need to try to get there.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle. And it's been 13 years of constant work of, reflecting and, working on myself, working on my relationships. It wasn't just I don't care about anybody. I had to work on my relationships. I had to forgive myself, let myself be human and fallible and not be perfect, and allow myself to make mistakes and to learn from them, and not hold myself accountable or beat myself up if I don't have all the answers. So it was just like the perfect storm for transformation.
That's a lot to go through, and being able to decide to thrive instead of going down deeper is just amazing strength you must have had to do that. Tell me about some of the tools that you found along the way on your journey to happiness.
Thank you. For me, my first tool was really spirituality. That was the first thing. Growing up, I did not grow up in a religious family at all, but I did grow up in an agnostic household. I mean, we're Muslim by culture. We didn't practice anything growing up. But my mom always said, just have a relationship with God. Just talk to God. Just talk to God. It wasn't even like pray or anything, or your problems will be solved. It was never anything like that. She was like, just talk to God.
Like he was a friend. Like he was a buddy.
Exactly. And I think that's where I started to have this beautiful relationship with God, because as a middle child, as the only girl on the block and all of these things, I was alone a lot. And so I internalized a lot of things. So, God was my friend. He was my buddy. So I would talk to him, and he never responded, but that was okay.
Yeah. That's good that you've had that. Yeah.
So that was my experience with God growing up. And then, as life unfolded, and I just always would go back to, that was my core, that was my consistent guideline. My consistent lifeline was that, I had God. I have
Yeah.
God. I have God. And then as I grew up and went through all of the things, I got deeper and deeper into it. So when my parents got divorced, I was dating someone and he was active in the church choir. He was a drummer. And I would go to choir rehearsal with him. And, next thing I knew, I was in the choir. And then I embraced, I never became Christian, but I embraced the Holy Spirit in the sense that I opened up my heart to let God in and help me heal from all of my anger, from resentment towards my parents and the divorce and the way they handled it and all the fighting and all of that was going on. And so as that evolved and I evolved, I wanted more and I was hungry for more and I wanted discipline and I wanted structure. I wanted a routine of what do I need to do to serve God? What do I need to do to heal and get all this out of me? And then that's when I started to go back to my roots, because I remember when my grandmother and grandfather came to visit from Iran when I was about 11 years old, 10, 11 years old, she had brought me like a prayer rug and the whole like cover called chador, and the, she's Shia, so they had like a stone that they use when they pray. So she brought me like the whole thing, and she had taught me how to do the 5 prayers, and I would get up and pray with her. And so I remember before she left, she made me promise her that I would learn about Islam. And so I started to learn. I was taking a mythology class in high school, and I had to compare 2 different religions. So I compared afterlives, and I was just like, what I liked about Islam was that everyone is judged based off of their actions in the world, right?
Yeah.
So our hands are scales, and, our good deeds go on our right hands and our bad deeds go on our left, and that determines our destiny. And so I was like, that's pretty fair. I like that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
I like
that is
that.
fair. Yeah, that seems fair.
So therefore, it drives us to be better people. And then that's when I started to really kind of go into Islam, and Islam really gave me the discipline that I needed. It really did. I started to wear the hijab, which I think at my age, I was, 18, 19 years old, and I was fairly attractive, easy on the eye, I guess. And that was the first thing people would say, was they would just kind of look at my looks and not think about, oh, is she intelligent? And that really bothered me. But at the same time, I was aware that I was charming enough that I could get away with stuff. So I would be flirty and a little manipulative about with it. So wearing hijab, helped. It forced me to be a better person and deal with my anger, because when you're not like cute on the outside or, appealing on the outside, and you're just sassy, it doesn't come off the same way, right? It's not cute.
Accepted as well.
It's not cute. So it's like and I also had this responsibility that I felt like I am coming out there as a Muslim, and I need to be a better example. Like, I can't be angry and like have hijab and claim to be Muslim. Like, I'm a bad representative for my faith. So it really forced me to like dig in and not rely on my vanity and on my external appearance to kind of and my charm to get through life. It really forced me to kind of dig in deep and work on the ugliness and the darkness, and really just embrace, all the goodness that comes with, spirituality and being a human being and the beauty of that. And so, that really did help me. The prayers, taught me. The beautiful thing about prayers is that it's very much like meditation. You go into stances that are very much like yoga, child's pose, standing mountain, things like that are very, very similar to yoga poses. And in the middle of that, you're reciting prayers to God. And it just, if you're having a bad day and things aren't going well, but it's prayer time, you're kind of forced to stop, meditate, recenter, and then continue your day. So there's a lot of brilliance in the structure of it. And then with fasting and all of those things, it really did give me the discipline that I needed and I was seeking to help me go through that healing process. So I feel like my spirituality really helped. However, I did get to a point where I realized there's more to it, right? I have my brain has been rewired. Expect trauma, to be self-critical, to not trust anybody. So I needed to rewire my brain. I feel like I had done a lot of work on my heart and I needed to rewire my brain. And that's when I started to go to therapy a little bit. And I had met a friend who had taken the Landmark Forum, and he had shared about how amazing it was for him and transformational, and it changed his life. And at first I was like, yeah, you're weird. You're a California hippie cult person. And then it was like I had known him for like after that conversation, like it was a year later. And I was just like at this point where I hated my job. I needed to change. I was living with my dad with my two kids back in California because I had eventually left, just trying to get on my 2 feet. And I just was like, I just needed something. And so I called him up and I'm like, hey, you remember that class you were telling me about like a year ago? And I said, the one that really changed your life. He said, yeah. I was like, well, this is what I'm going through. I was like, I just feel like I need a shift and I don't know how to get that shift. I was like, will the class help me? And he was like, absolutely. That night I registered. From that moment, my life started to change. Like within 2 days, I got a job that was paying me $35,000 more, which led me to the career that I'm in now. It gave me the tools that I needed to really, really go deep and address my resentment and the way that my brain was wired because of the previous traumas and incidents in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It just gave me a lot of practical tools that I use to this day to help me deal with the way that our brain works, right?
Yeah.
And that's important too, right? You need to deal with that. And then, I just kept taking the courses and staying in that conversation of transformation and dealing with that. And then eventually I started to look at my physical health. What does that mean? Because I really am a true believer that human beings, we're not just one thing. We're a lot of things. We're physical beings, we're spiritual beings, we're emotional beings. All of those things, you need to take care of them. It's like when you have a car, you can't just take care of the tires, right?
Yeah.
You have to take care of the engine. You have to take care of all the different parts in the engine. You have to take care of, your headlights, and there's a lot of maintenance that goes on that. And your body is the same way. Your humanity is the same way. We have to take care of all of it or we won't thrive, right? Because there's now evidence that your diet can impact your psychology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your mental wellness. For example, I was suffering from major anxiety, and some of it is definitely valid from my genetics and traumas. It just got uncontrollable. And even to a point where I was like, I would go to my doctor and I'm like, look, I don't really know why I'm anxious. Like my job is stable. Everything is good. Like, I don't know why I have so much anxiety. And so she did a metal test on me and found out that my mercury, my lead, and my thallium was just really high. And that was causing me to experience anxiety. So we had to do a detox. So it's very important to look at every aspect of you, because they're related. It's all intertwined. So you got to take care of all of it and take the time to practice taking care of all of it and heal yourself. That way you can really thrive as a person. And when you're thriving, you can help the people around you thrive.
I love that. So it sounds like you learned a lot through the different practices and the Landmark Forum, and finding a medical provider or a practitioner that was able to look at those metals in your body. That's really interesting. I'm going to have to look into that, about the metals and how they affect our body.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Because traditional medicine, unfortunately, it's so, there are so many processes and guidelines and restrictions and procedures that they have to follow. So I find that going to integrative doctors or naturopathic doctors, they at least give you this different perspective. Integrative doctors are, I lean towards them because they do kind of a blend of both heavy science and more like supplemental type stuff and things like that. And I really appreciate that because they rely heavily on the data, not only just what you're telling them, but what they're seeing as far as the patterns in how your body is absorbing nutrients and what are your hormone levels and what is your state of your heart and your digestive system. They like really look at you like a huge puzzle. So I really, 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 I'm grateful to have met my doctor.
Oh, wonderful. And so tell me, how are you doing now after all of this? It's been 13 years since you lost your daughter and the trauma of that event of losing your friend. Tell me, how are you doing now?
I'm doing wonderful. I mean, we've been in quarantine for what, almost 3 months now. I am at peace, at ease, and I've found that I'm able to accomplish so much more right now because I've dealt with a lot of those things. So it's helping me focusing on helping others through my podcast. We're Not So Different. We're trying to help bridge gaps between different groups and culturally to help unite people and bring awareness to all the struggles so that we can be there for each other and build that community. Work has been wonderful. I'm really grateful and at peace, but it's a never ending thing though. We still have our triggers and our incidents,
Yeah.
but in the end, there is hope. And I think one myth that people who have struggle with depression and anxiety, that I feel like I've heard a lot of people saying, this may not apply to everybody, but it is pretty prevalent, is that, there's this desire for somebody to kind of save you because you don't really know what to do. But the reality of it is that you are the one who has to do the work, right? So that's kind of what I tell anyone who I see struggling with it. It's like, you have to do the work.
Yeah.
That there is no one can save you. Everybody would love to save you. If there was anybody out there that knew that they could save people who were suffering, they would. But they can't because they don't know what's going on in your brain. You are the one who has to try to sort that out. And people will be there to help you and guide you if you let them help you and support you. However, you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to get naked in front of yourself and just really be honest with yourself about what you're doing and what you're feeling and cleansing your intentions and your ego and all of those things. And it can be scary and very uncomfortable. It's a good discomfort. So if we can learn to become accepting of the discomfort that comes with these types of conversations and transformation, it'll be easier for everyone.
That's wonderful. And I feel like, I have learned so much from you just by talking to you. Can you tell us where we can find you on social media, or you mentioned your podcast? And I'll put
Yeah.
those things in the show notes as well.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. You can follow us on at WNS Different. That's WNSDIFFERENT. That's on Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. We're Not So Different. And we're also on Twitter. You can also email us, wnsdifferent@gmail.com. Those are the best ways to connect with me. Ask me any questions you like or learn more about our podcast and the work that we're doing, especially right now with everything that's going on
Yeah.
in our world and the protests and police brutality and just trying to help people of color get a voice.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm going to definitely check those things out. I also invite our listeners to check those out as well. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention today?
No, I think this pretty much captures a lot of it. I really appreciate you having me on your podcast, Catalyst for Change, and sharing my story. And I hope that it helps inspire people to really just choose to be happy and take the steps that you need to bring joy into your life.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You've been listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica, your host. Join us next week as we talk to someone else and hear their story of resiliency. And don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. See you next week. Bye-bye.